Welcome to the Rural Recharge, a podcast of the Florida Farm Bureau Federation. Rural Recharge is a guided conversation that allows you to cut through the noise and multitude of information out there. You should be able to trust your sources, which is why we're a platform that comes straight from the source, the farmers and ranchers growing what we eat, wear, and use every day. Our guest joining us today is Miss Kelly Ah, the Suwannee River Partnership Outreach Coordinator. The Suwannee River Partnership works to address water quantity and quality issues in the Suwannee and Santa Fe River basins. Kelly's role in accomplishing that goal includes managing funding partners, stakeholder groups, and communicating through various means to the public about the partnership. Ms. Ah works out of the IFAS North Florida Research and Education Center in Live Oak and is a huge part in planning our annual Suwannee CARES event. Kelly, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's great. All right, let's start off here. Let's start with, tell us how you got started, a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and what led you to your current role.
So I grew up in Live Oak, Florida. I went to Suwannee High School. I come from a family of farmers, but after my grandparents died, they split the family land up in between the 5 remaining children. So I grew up mainly with pine trees, but my dad was really involved in agriculture. He just didn't want to farm anymore. And that's one of the reasons why everything was split up. But I got really involved in FFA. I had an advisor that she really talked me into running for office. And then I was the state secretary for state of FFA. And I went to University of Florida for agriculture, education, liked I had every intention of being an ag teacher. Then I decided I didn't want to deal with kids so much. So I liked working with the general public and doing education on that side. So I switched over to mainly being ag comm. Went to Columbus, Ohio for my master's. Oh, wow. And while I was there, I was recruited for a company that was in the automotive industry. So in my bio, I said I went from tractors to sports cars because that's basically what I did. I ended up going to Phoenix for a while, but I had the call for coming home. And as much as the automotive industry is fun, it's not the most rewarding profession to have. And it's also, you're not changing lives really in the automotive industry. And so I came back to Florida and I was doing some contract work and I wanted to be back in an office because I'm a people person, I like being around people. Right, sure. And there was this role that was open and from what I understand, they hired me because I didn't have any bad habits and they thought that I would be a lot of fun to have around the office. But I had been out of agriculture for so long. I had been away from Florida for a while. So I was coming fresh into the Suwannee River Partnership, having to basically relearn everything that's happening in agriculture today, everything that's happening on the environmental side today. And I grew up on the river, so I had that strong tie to not only ag, but the environmental side. And so I started my journey in this role in July of 2019. Oh,
wow. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Well, welcome home. It's good to be back, isn't it?
I'm very excited to be back. So it's been really, I've really enjoyed it. I was kind of shocked about that, but I've really enjoyed being back in Live Oak.
All right. So Kelly, what does the Suwannee River Partnership Coordinator do? Tell us a little bit about your role.
Yeah, so I am grant funded. I'm kind of unique in that position. We do have somebody else at the center that he's on a similar type of grant, but I'm funded directly through the FDAC's Office of Ag Water Policy, but Florida Department of Environmental Protection pays into that. The Suwannee River Water Management District pays into that. And I'm housed at IFAS. I like to say it's because we're Switzerland, we're not regulatory. And so while I do have, I technically have 4 bosses that I have to answer to. There's certain deliverables that I, of course, need to hit with being on a grant. My goal is to bring together stakeholders in the Suwannee River Basin from Georgia all the way down to the Gulf. And we're to use science-based solutions to solve our water quality and quantity issues. And some of that is education on the agriculture side is education, even with our environmental stakeholders that we have. But my goal is to get those two parties together because while we may disagree what agriculture may look like, we agree that agriculture has to stay in the Suwannee Valley. And so we just need to figure out the way to make it economically viable basically to outbid the highest bidder and keep agriculture in the basin.
Tell us a little bit about the partnership, how was it originated? Where did it come about?
So it originated in 1999. From what I understand, dairy and the poultry industry were kind of our heavy hitters in the area. And so they were wanting to get help to them as fast as possible. There was a lot of eyes on that industry. And so they were trying to figure out how to get some cost share dollars to them, how to get them to move in the right direction, which is very expensive and that requires some funding. And so they wanted to bring all the parties together, all the players together for that. And so that was the Water Management District, that was IFAS, that was also the Florida Department of Ag. And then they also brought Farm Bureau into that fold as well. And so they were trying to bring in all the stakeholders to kind of help push things forward so that we can continue to be environmental stewards of the land in the Suwannee Valley.
Absolutely. And that's where Farm Bureau did get involved. And especially being a general ag organization was able to kind of coordinate and cooperate and bring everybody into a position where we could be in a good, solid relationship. Yeah.
And that's super. I think people discount that in this industry at times, that especially when I go to different groups and I talk to them, they want things to happen immediately, but they don't realize that there's a whole relationship that has to be built behind it. And that's one of my goals, is that building those relationships so we can actually work together and not yell at each other. That's always important.
You mean yell at each other?
Yeah. It happens sometimes, but the goal is to be hard on the issue, not on the person. So,
well, there you go. All right. So we work together, and Farm Bureau does, and we work together on a Suwannee CARES event.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about that. So what is your perspective on it? You're very involved with it. You're very engaged with it. The Suwannee CARES event. Tell the folks out there, we have people all over the world that are listening to this podcast and around the state, and they may not even know what the Suwannee CARES event is.
Yeah. So the Suwannee CARES, from what I understand, when we started moving forward on the partnership, Farm Bureau is like, we need to do something about and just recognize farmers that are being good environmental stewards. And at the time, Dwight Stansel, who was a representative in the area, he actually hosted these big dinners out at his farm where we honored farmers that are being environmental stewards here in the Suwannee Valley. And then when Dwight decided to take a step back, that event ended up moving to the North Florida Research and Education Center, Suwannee Valley. They were kind of took up that stronghold and just making all the logistics happen on that. But when I was brought in on the Suwannee River Partnership, I was told immediately that I would be involved in CARES. And I was fine with that because I like working on events. And they kept telling me like, oh, it's so great. You don't understand. And I didn't you have to actually attend this to understand what it's like. But it's amazing. You have all the industries in the Suwannee Valley there that's providing food, and you just have everybody getting together just that maybe you haven't seen in a really long time. And then you get to honor these amazing farmers in the area and learn about what they're doing to be environmental stewards in the Suwannee Valley. So that it's a really big dinner. It's a really big, fun dinner. But it has a really great purpose too.
It has food, but it has a lot of fellowship. That's for sure.
A lot of fellowship. Yeah.
So everybody will hang around and kind of it's a reunion of sorts.
Really is. Yeah.
I tell you, when the first one I ever went to, Kelly, it was festive, and I just announced it just to be the food was great, but the fellowship was unbelievable. But the festive atmosphere was just exciting and electric. What's your favorite part of Suwannee CARES event?
I'm not going to say when it's done because I feel like that's just because I mean, it is, we spend months planning this. I don't think people realize, like, we have a team of people that they come in because it's not just one person that's able to do this event, because we're doing this on top of our regular jobs. And so we have a team of people that come in, they contact all their industry folks. They help us with all the logistics on it. And so just to actually, at the beginning, when everything starts, to just see it finally all together, to see all the tents up and to just see, like, we have all the decorations ready. Like, I feel there's like this energy that comes into play. And then you start seeing people filter in and they're just excited to see people that they haven't seen since, the previous Suwannee CARES. But I like the beginning of it. It has this great feel and energy to it.
How many people normally attend?
So we have about 500 attend, but we had record attendance this year of about 750 people, I believe. We were trying to we had some people that they all took an area of Suwannee CARES, and they were trying to do a little head count just to kind of get a gauge. And we do take registration, but of course we don't capture everybody. Sure. Everybody's so excited to get in that they just bypass registration to go straight back. But yeah, we had 750 people this year.
So Suwannee CARES is actually an acronym. And
it is.
And what does that acronym stand for?
It's the County Alliance for Responsible Environmental Stewardship.
There you go.
Thank
Absolutely. You. And so this covers the Suwannee Valley, River Valley. And tell everybody a little bit about what that looks like. What does the Suwannee River Valley look like from a geographic standpoint?
The Suwannee River Valley, if you pull up like the Suwannee River Water Management District, it's basically the Suwannee River Water Management District. So it starts in Jefferson County. It goes out towards it doesn't go all the way to Duval, and then it captures part of Alachua County, Levy, Gilchrist. Those are all involved as well. And so it's a pretty big area that we cover. And we had 12 recipients this past year. We try to get one from every single county. That's not always feasible. We have such great farmers in our area. We're actually running out because I think we're having to honor people again because we have everybody's so great in our area. So, but yeah, that's the area that it generally covers. And
that's where it is. It's a county alliance. So those counties, several different counties within the district, within the valley, within the area, this zone, the Suwannee River Valley, which is the Suwannee River Water Management District's boundaries, is pretty extensive.
It is.
And what are the major crops grown in that area, Kelly?
The major crops that we have, it's primarily peanuts and corn, and we also have a lot of hay.
Right.
My job focuses more on our high nitrogen users, and so I work a lot with our corn growers, watermelon, carrots. But our main industries would be our peanuts, corn, watermelons. We should include them as well, and then also our cattle hay. Yeah.
And then carrots was a big one for a little bit and kind of jumped up and was a unique starting area. Tell us a little bit about carrots. Yeah. So carrots is relatively new to the area. It's the main reason why we have carrots is because you got to think about our beachy soils that we have. Right. They're a root crop. And so they just really love to grow in our soils. We can grow those nice long carrots that people like to buy in the store because it has to be marketable. But we grow about 5,000 to 8,000 acres of carrots in the area. And we would potentially grow more, but the processing plant can't handle more than that. And it ends up being a rotation with corn and peanuts. And so it's a winter crop. We're able to grow it in the winter when usually we wouldn't have anything growing in our soils at that time. It's a very unique thing for the uniqueness of being able to grow, especially in the winter, but also unique in that the soil type is very, very unique for deep sandy soils that will leach as well and have some propensity to do so. And that's probably why water quality as well as quantity is a critical thing in the Suwannee River Valley. And that's where you come in, especially when it comes to maintaining goals in regard to that. Tell us a little bit about, because of the soil profile and type, that there's some concerns and some things that need to be addressed. Yeah, absolutely. We know that if we manage our 4 R's, which is the 4 R's we refer to especially with growing, is our right rate of fertilizer, right source, right timing, and right placement. That's right.
But those are kind of hard to hit sometimes, especially when you have large acreage. We're starting to focus a little bit more potentially on a 5th R called the right irrigation as well with all of these crops. But if you are able to get your fertilizer out at the right timing, right placement, and if you irrigate it properly, then you can reduce how much you're leaching into the soil. But our soil profiles, it does not take much for it to move through the soil profile down into our groundwater. And that's what we're trying to prevent, it keeping our nitrogen, especially in North Florida. That's our focus, is on nitrogen, trying to keep that from going into our groundwater. So there's a lot of best management practices, precision agriculture that can help with that. And that's what as a partnership, that's what we're focusing on, trying to move forward a little bit more.
Kelly, can you explain why is nitrogen such the target and why is it so bad at higher levels?
Yeah, so the fear is that the nitrogen levels will get above drinking water, safe drinking water, which is, I believe, 10 parts per million. And whenever that happens, if you've ever heard of something called blue baby syndrome, so for pregnant women and also younger kids, that what happens is that when there's too much nitrogen in the water, it depletes their oxygen levels. And so they actually start turning blue because they don't have enough oxygen in their bloodstream. And so that's always a fear. The other side of that is that are algal blooms connected to high nitrogen levels? And in the springs, there could be an argument made for yes, but there's also an argument made for flow as well, because you can have some springs that have a very high nitrogen level that look absolutely beautiful, lots of underwater vegetation, but then you can have some that it has a lot of algae and it's probably more tied to flow, maybe a little bit on the nitrogen as well. So those are our two main concerns, just keeping the water safe for drinking and then also just keeping the springs nice and clear and not having a ton of algal blooms that are happening.
Let's talk about BMPs, best management practices. You alluded to it just a moment ago. Name some of those that do help and assist, especially in regard to, you name the 4 R's, 5 R's potential. We go to 5. It'd be hard for me to memorize a 5th, to be honest. But so moving along, there are some things that do involve cost share. Talk about cost share. What does it look like? What does a farmer do? And what does he obtain? And what is the benefit to those that are involved in providing those tax dollars that end up in cost share?
Yeah, I mean, cost share is tax dollars monies. And so when the Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services, specifically the Office of Ag Water Policy, they are, through the best management practice, they have those cost share dollars. So does the Water Management District. And of course, we have federal cost share dollars that come into play as well. But if we're looking at the state specifically, because it's because there's such a focus on being able to use our taxpayer dollars appropriately, we definitely don't want to use them in a way that it doesn't make sense. When the Office of Ag Water Policy comes in and a farmer is wanting to advance their best management practices or buy equipment that would be more precision agriculture, it has to make sense. On the environmental side, it has to be an environmental savings on water and fertilizer, but it also has to be like, if you look, you can't buy a piece of equipment for an 80-acre farm that would make more sense on a 1,000-acre farm. And so there has to be a conscious, logical decision about making sure that we're using our cost share dollars appropriately. Some of the best cost, this is my personal opinion, just of what I've seen, but soil moisture sensors, I think, are one of our best management practices that we have as of this moment, mainly because a soil moisture sensor, it gets buried into the ground. And so a farmer can pull up an app on their phone and they're able to see where the water is at below the surface. They're even able to see where their nitrogen's at. There's a way that you can tell like where your roots have grown, because that's where you can start seeing where it's pulling water and fertilizer on that graph. And so it's just kind of to me, that's a no-brainer of a best management practice, something that should be cost shared, because it does help farmers reduce how much water they're using, reduce how much fertilizer that they're using, just being able to utilize that tool. There's some that's like on the expense side, that's one of our least expensive ones that we can cost share. And predominantly, I feel like a lot of farmers are using that as of this moment. So to me, that's a win-win on taxpayer dollars and then also for the farmer as well and the environment.
Are there any things, some things in regard to equipment, precision ag, we were talking about that as well. You mentioned it a while ago with, especially in regard to the right placement. Yeah. So some of those things a farmer could actually have a cost share with some equipment that could help them to make sure it's in the right place. Yeah,
we have a grant that was funded through FDACS that we're working on right now. We purchased something called a highboy. And so it's a Y drop applicator. And so those Y drops come down and they're able to apply nitrogen directly by the corn stalk. And that's our focus is on corn because that's a high nitrogen user in the area. And the nice thing about a highboy is that you can still use it when corn's at its maturity. And so it will go over the tops of the corn and won't damage it at all. And so we got a grant to be able to do this for 4 years. We we take our equipment at IFAS onto 4 farms every year, and we take half of their pivot. And so we apply their nitrogen for them using this applicator. And there's a lot of reasons why we're doing that. We were working with a farmer that he saw great success on this, to where he started retrofitting his own equipment to actually do this. But we don't know if it actually realistically works for our smaller farmers. Like, we don't know if it makes economical sense to even be able to do that. That's why we had to do this project. That's why we had to do this research project and figure this out. So we've been going on farms and we're applying nitrogen on half of their pivot and just comparing yields and seeing if there is a cost savings, or because it's a very expensive piece of equipment as well. The price has significantly jumped since when we purchased it. But that's one of the ways that we're doing it. Just doing that precise application directly by the row on corn. But and as of this moment in our minds, it makes the most sense when the corn's the smallest, when the roots have not grown that much, they're not covering the in-between rows. And so hopefully, they can move on to broadcasting whenever. But it does save a little bit of money on the diesel and all of that as well, being able to switch over.
Well, Kelly, I appreciate you explaining that, because sometimes, in your mind, it's hard to picture what it is, what's actually being done. And so it's equipment. It's a lot of these very new technologically advanced things with soil moisture meters that are telling you when you need to apply things rightly and accurately in regard to moisture. When it comes to the actual placement of the fertilizer, there's equipment that can put it in the right place and not just a broadcast, which we're accustomed to. But there's those. Also, that's why it's a partnership, because it takes money and takes technology. It takes experimentation to make sure that this is a good and wise investment. And that's why you've got to deal with all these different groups, bringing them together for this to work. And likewise, too, it's one thing to have production, and there's a benefit from that, because agriculture is critical. We need to eat. Likewise, we need to have, for a place like the Suwannee River Valley, agriculture is huge. It's a huge part of who the culture, the lifestyle, but also the economy. Yeah. The nutrient levels in regard to water quality have come to question, and the agriculture is big in the area. So it's a big opportunity to be able to reduce some of that load. But also it's the Suwannee River Valley, it's also a very large area for water recharge too, isn't it? That's a huge benefit to the taxpayer as well, because they're the ones that are benefiting from groundwater that'll be extracted from there, that goes in through there, filtrated through there. Yeah.
And not only that, it's, you think about the tourism aspect in the Suwannee River or in the Suwannee Valley as well, because we have the largest concentration of springs in the area. That brings a lot of people into the area. And that's why I say, like, within the partnership, that's why we may disagree on what agriculture may look like, but we can agree that agriculture needs to be there for the recharge, because we know that when the saying is that the last crop is usually houses.
That's right.
And so once we get asphalt on the ground, there's nothing that we can do about it. The chance of that water recharge, of helping our environment, it just starts going down the drain at that point in time, no pun intended. but yeah, it's very important that we keep that recharge up, just for tourism, for drinking water, to be able to actually water our crops so that we can eat. There's a lot of benefits to keeping it clean.
So there have been some goals that have been set to obtain and to reach. Have those been met?
They have not been met.
Give us a little bit of insight on that, and how long will it take it, or will they ever be obtained?
That's a really great question. I think that's something that we're all trying to figure out. Depending on who you talk to, the answer may change. I think it's a very lofty goal based off of what we have and what the Florida Department of Environmental Protection is requiring of us using the basin management action plans. And so we have a basin management action plan on the Suwannee River and on the Santa Fe. And there are certain goals that we have to meet on how much nitrogen is reduced going into the groundwater. And that number has changed. It has definitely changed. And I don't think that they've put out the latest one as of this moment, but it went from, at one point it was 4.2, now it's up to 5.8. And agriculture is the main user of of land use in that area. So the bigger piece of the pie goes to agriculture for that nitrogen reduction. And in my mind, it just almost feels like we have to get rid of agriculture altogether to make that happen, but that can't be the case. We can't make that happen at all. And we can't put it back in restoration forestry because that's also a nitrogen user as well. And so I don't know. I think we're in a good spot right now to try to reach those goals. We can at least get close to it.
Kelly, who else is in the pie? Who else is a contributor?
So we have septic and when municipalities as well. Those are in those and as part of the pie. But you got to think it's basically everybody's part of that pie. Everybody in the river basin is part of that pie, no matter if you're involved in agriculture or not. You contribute to our nitrogen loading. You contribute to how much water we pump out. And so we're all a piece of that pie.
And this has to do with water quality and quantity. And so withdrawals, and especially with more people that come in, there'll be greater withdrawals as well. Yeah. And it's all a balance, and ultimately comes down to. But farming and agriculture has contributed through partnerships like we have that through reduction of fertilizer.
Yep.
That using less to grow more. And likewise with a reduction of water usages as well. That's where it comes to, especially with the soil moisture sensors and being able to put the not too much, not too little, but to meet the exact need in the right time of the crop. How much has been reduced in regard to water consumption, and what's been any numbers on regard to reduction in nitrogen use?
So we have worked with farmers before that we have been able to capture that data from them. And the one farmer that I was talking about, that he had the Y drop applicators and he loved it so much that he ended up retrofitting his own equipment to make that happen. He was reducing water by the hundreds of millions of gallons by using soil moisture sensors, by just changing some practices. He was also reducing how much fertilizer he was putting. I know that it may seem small in some, but 50 pounds per acre is a lot.
Huge.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's a lot. And so he was able to really reduce how much nitrogen he was putting out by upgrading to these practices. And so it seems like, I think when I struggle sometimes because I go to so many of the environmental sides that they have a tendency to kind of beat down on the agriculture industry, but they're not entrenched in it like we are, and seeing like all of the effort and all of everything that farmers are doing to be better environmental stewards. And it's not going to happen overnight. Like there's a lot of money that makes that happen. But they're making some really great strides to help reduce how much nitrogen we're using and to reduce how much water we're using.
And you're seeing that on the other end, especially in regard to those samples. And
from what I understand, the water samplings are not changing at the springs. So
even though there's been a huge reduction by production agriculture, there's not seeing at the spring level a reduction in nitrogen.
Nope. So
Kelly, that doesn't make sense.
It does not make sense at all.
Unless there are more people coming in and they're the contributor.
Yeah. Well, we do have 1,000 people per day coming in to live here. And it is, so we're having way more houses. I know in Suwannee County, it's one of the fastest growing counties in the area. And we've already had talks of all these new subdivisions that are coming into play. Well, we don't have a wastewater treatment plant in Suwannee County. It's all septic. And so that has to go somewhere. And it's not, and I'm not saying that, I don't know what kind of septic systems they're putting in. If there's something that helps reduce nitrogen, I'm really hoping that's what they're doing. But at the same time, that is a lot of water that's being pumped out to be used. And that's a lot of septic systems that are being put in that leaches nitrogen as well. So it is. And also, our springs are so dynamic.
That's right.
We do not know what's happening below us. We don't know what legacy nitrogen we have below. We are connected to another river basin in the St. Johns that's pulling a lot of water from our aquifer that direction. And so it's a very dynamic system that even though we're making a lot of strides on land, I think it's going to take time for us to see things happening at the spring vent.
And you mentioned legacy. Legacy is long-term, long-standing, has been applied years ago and sitting there and leaching at this point.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned that there are other areas that are withdrawing from the aquifer that is right underneath the Suwannee Valley there, and that's actually being gobbled up by big municipalities like Jacksonville.
Yeah, absolutely. And so even the flow beneath our feet's changing than what it used to be. And so there's a lot happening in that system, and you can't discount what's happening above the ground as to what's actually happening or what's happening out coming in our samples.
And production agriculture is just a part of that. But we can have a big impact on that, especially in production agriculture, because the benefit is that if I, as a producer, reduce my inputs on fertilizer, that's an economic benefit and keep me viable in the industry.
Absolutely.
If I'm reducing my irrigation costs, that's huge and a benefit to environment as well as economically. It's a big benefit across the board for this partnership, which is a tremendous value for what the taxpayer inputs to what we're actually getting out of it. So I tell you, but I think it's very important for everybody to know is that everybody is contributing to this.
Absolutely.
And everybody, maybe not even in the direct vicinity or in the jurisdiction of the Suwannee River Water Management District, could actually be participating in some of its issues and concerns and being a part of the BMAP. I mean, Georgia definitely is draining that way, and they may not want any part, but there's a state line that draws a line there, but they're definitely have an impact on what's happening south of it.
The Suwannee River Basin starts in Georgia, and so everything that's happening in the Suwannee Valley, it starts in Georgia. And I know that they are working very hard up there. We've had conversations, and we try our best to get them more involved in the partnership, but there is that state line, and they do things different in Georgia, and sometimes they're allowed to come down to Florida to do business. And so it has been a struggle to try to figure out how to make that work a little bit more, but that's something we're definitely focused on, is trying to also work with our state that's to the north of us.
Well, Kelly, I can tell you this, my head's swimming just by all the information that you've given and what's happening. And I tell you what, it's a very complex matter, a very complex issue that we're dealing with in regard to water quality as well as water quantity. And agriculture just has a small part, but a big part in it, because, and one of the things is, there just aren't very many producers left, and yet control a pretty significant amount of the land. And that impact is easy to handle with a partnership like yours and us. And we will do our part, because I do believe, and I am, being a producer myself, farmers are the first environmentalists.
Yes, absolutely.
And we have to eat. So we're going to have to learn how to do this and keep agriculture sustainable and viable, because it is a huge benefit to society, not only from a food standpoint, but from an ecological, environmental, and economic standpoint as well. And it's just a wonderful thing to be able to work with folks like Kelly Awe and the Suwannee River Partnership, and it's a blessing to do it. I like our CARES event. It's a fun thing, and folks can do that. What time of year is the Suwannee CARES event?
It happens in May, and so it's usually the first Thursday in May, which I don't have the date for that right off the top of my head, but May 2nd, maybe, I don't know, but that's the first Thursday in May usually.
First Thursday in May, every year it seems to be at least close to it, and folks can come up to just north of I-10, and they're at Live Oak and at the North Florida Regional Education Center, IFAS, and that's where we have that event. And there'll be about 500 folks to 1,000 folks there. It seems like even more of that at times, but good food, good fellowship, just celebrating what we're able to do and in agriculture, and especially in regard to these BMAPs and BMPs, all those things that we could take a test on later.
Absolutely. I know. I feel like I tell people that my job is alphabet soup sometimes, because there's so many acronyms that you can kind of pair together. But
well, I tell you what, Kelly, you did an excellent job of keeping it really, really simple for everybody in this listening audience to be able to understand. But I think all of us understand the importance. And I just want to say thank you for taking your time to do that, to share with us is what you do because it's so important.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Like I said, I was in the automotive industry beforehand, and you're not changing lives in the automotive industry, but I feel like being back in agriculture and working on the environmental side, it's an honorable profession that we have to be in agriculture. And I very much appreciate every day that I go into the office that I feel like I am making a difference, hopefully making a difference for future generations in the state of Florida.
I can assure you are. There's no doubt about it. Is there anything you'd like to leave? One last thing or that you'd like to leave with this listening audience?
One thing I would like to leave is that agriculture is an extremely important, I think, through going through Idalia, I think we all realize how important agriculture is to our area even more. And just being able to realize that we need money to make some of these things happen in order for us all to see the benefit of it later on. I'm always impressed with our farmers, especially after Idalia. I was very hesitant about things that I was a little worried about everything, but I've never felt better in our community than I have today. And just the amount of work that they're doing and just allowing people onto their farms to learn, it's just been absolutely amazing. And I think that we approach agriculture as the problem. And I think that the conversation needs to be changed to how agriculture can be the solution. That's one of the things that anytime I'm with groups that are against agriculture or don't understand what agriculture is doing, I try to change the way that we look at them into being a solution, because they really are. They're our largest land use. We want to keep them in business. It needs to be economically viable, what we're asking them to do. And we're wanting to prevent houses and asphalt from going up. And so if we can start just reframing everything and realizing that agriculture is not the problem, agriculture is the solution to helping keep our water clean and plentiful in the Suwannee River Valley.
Well, here we've had our Suwannee River Partnership Outreach Coordinator, Kelly Ah. Kelly, thank you so much. You've been a blessing.
Thanks.
Thank you for supporting the Rural Recharge podcast. We hope that you're enjoying these conversations brought to you by farmers for our neighbors. While you're here, please consider giving us a rating or review. It really helps us to continue to share the story of our Florida farm families and their important impact on our local communities. Thank you.